Good evening, everyone. Hi, I'm Jordana Kier. This is Lauren Ryan. We're both first years, and we serve on the Bernstein Leadership and Ethics Board. We are very excited to present tonight a panel on demystifying the B Corporation. We're excited to have Professor Georgie Keohane moderate this panel, along with Katie, Lily, Jesse, and Sophie, who represent different B Corp companies, as well as Sophie, who works with the lab, which is sort of the entity that oversees the certification of B Corp. So she's going to start off with a little primer on B Lab and what a B Corp is, and then we'll jump into the panel. And thank you all for coming, and please feel free to stay afterwards for the informal reception outside.
You guys should jump in. Anything to add? So yeah, I actually just went back and looked and saw the title of this was Demystifying B Corporations, which I think in some ways makes us sound more mysterious than we deserve to be, but excited to talk about, kind of give some clarification and a bit of a baseline understanding of what we at B Lab do. And then my goal is really step back in the shadows and let the folks who are B Corporations speak to their experiences, because I think sort of talking about them in operation makes a lot more sense. But I did want to take a minute, and I will try to do this quickly, and it's hard for me to skip key details, but I'm going to do the best I can and happy to answer questions later. But I thought we'd start a little bit with our vision, which is that broadly what we aspire to and what we look to is an evolution of capitalism. We sometimes over drinks think about a day that where every company provides value to shareholders, but also considers the environment, society, their workers, the needs of their consumers in all of their major decisions, and either reduces the negative impacts on them or provides value to those stakeholders. We recognize that is a sort of broad and lofty vision, and so this is actually a slide we use more internally. I'm not sure that folks use it externally, but I like to use it because I think it helps speak a little bit to our ethos and our frame of mind. And so we liken this to building a cathedral. And the analogies is that the work that we're doing, that the companies in the community are doing, will hopefully make massive change, but in many generations, and try to be realistic about the expectations on ourselves and the expectations in terms of rate of change. But then we also recognize that a cathedral is built by many, many artisans and by many, many experts working in many different fields. So there's the person who puts up the tile and the person who designs the apps or the stained glass. And we recognize that we're part of a really, really broad and interesting community of organizations that are bringing their expertise, their individual effort, their perspective to the table, as well as investors and consumers and legislators, governments. This is a huge movement. We're seeing incredible activity and hoping that what we bring to the table is additive, not duplicative, and we try to check ourselves on that pretty often. So B Lab really works on 3 initiatives, and I just want to talk briefly about 2 of them today. We believe that the entrepreneur is really the engine of change. And by entrepreneur, we're talking about entire business, we're talking about an entrepreneur, and we want to do what we can to support that entity or that individual. So the thing we're probably most known for is B Corp certification. So that is our effort to shine a light on companies that are really walking the walk and to separate excellence from potentially just good marketing. We also work on tools for impact investors. So creating rating and analytics tools so that impact investors can begin to continue to have rigor in their investments and compare companies on a set of standards. And the last thing we work on is legislation. We've now passed legislation in 12 states that I'll speak to in a little bit that allows for essentially mission law in companies. And I want to spend the most time talking about certification, mostly because it's what I know most about. So the way a lot of people describe this is B Corporation certification is for a company what fair trade is for a product, or LEED is for a building. We certify the company as a whole, looking at their environmental impact, the impact on their workers, community, which is both the local community and also their supply chain, their governance, and also their business model. We have just this week hit the 700 mark. We have 700 certified B corporations in the world. from across sectors. I think we have over 60 sectors represented now. Everything from cheesemakers to consultants to investment firms, shoe companies, and what we try as much as possible to make our standards as relevant to all sectors. So we're not a sector-specific industry standard. We're really looking at comparison across sectors and across size. We now have B corporations all over the world. We focus most of our business development and efforts in the United States and Canada to date, but we have been approached by companies around the world and are seeing some real champions around the world. We recently certified an Afghan telecom called Roshan, which I knew about in my last work that does incredible work with girls and women in the workforce. And they are, I think, a $400 million company. I'm really excited to build a movement in that region. We also have a sister organization in Latin America called Sistema B that approached us about a year and a half ago and is now up and running and really trying to build a movement there. So we share all of our intellectual property. We have, it could look like a franchise, but a lot going on in that space as well. So how does a company become certified? I think the folks here could probably speak to it even better than I could because they've been through it. But there are essentially two things that need to happen. The first is that they need to meet a performance requirement. So by using our online assessment, they need to meet 80 points out of the possible 200 points looking at the categories that I talked about before. In some ways, that could be considered a 40% pass rate. But the reality is that the assessment and the standards that we put forward are really intended to provide as many opportunities for points, so as many different ways that a company can have impact. It's not intended to be a compliance review. We don't expect any company to hit 200 points. The 80 is a pretty high bar, and companies that make it are doing pretty interesting work. We take our own assessment, and I think we're, I don't know, somewhere around 106 or something. Spend all day thinking about these impacts. We also ask all companies to meet a legal requirement, so to actually add legal language to their articles and corporations saying that they will consider all stakeholders when making fiduciary decisions. And generally what we find is companies have always been, our companies, the companies in our community have been acting this way for a long time, and this just gives them legal protection and permission to do so. It makes explicit to shareholders that they operate in a different way. And then we have folks sign our Declaration of Interdependence, and that's the point at which certification actually takes place. And I think an important thing to note is that all the information and tools that we've worked on are free and open to the public. So everything up until certification, we consider a public good. And we want people to measure what matters. We want startups to get on the assessment and use our best practice tools. We have language for governance documents. We have examples of how folks have engaged employees around this. And more than anything, we want to meet people where they are and help them move along the spectrum. And so we've talked about developing almost a Measure What Matters campaign, where we're just encouraging folks to get on whether certification is ever on their radar. It's a good, I believe it's a good tool. So these are the categories we look at, and companies do need to score a sort of a baseline. You can't kind of get the pie with one category, so folks tend to have points in all these categories. A lot of our companies are much stronger in one space than the other. And often find that when they're going through the assessment, they've thought a lot about the environment. They're a green building company. This is what they do, and they consider themselves a strong green building company. We had a company like that in the Navy Yards that got to the community section and said, got to workers and said, well, what's paternity leave? We've never thought about that. And so more and more we're seeing folks filling in the blanks. Griston Bakery up in Yonkers does incredible work on workforce development. After taking the assessment, they've really put a focus on their environmental footprint and gotten solar panels, I think, donated and working on their practices internally. So once a company is certified, we make a profile on the website. We do the best we can to build community within these 700 companies. We bring folks together once a year in person, anyone who's interested. We have regional gatherings, often just for fun. We have worked together to pass legislation. Folks in San Francisco work together to pass a purchasing preference in the city of San Francisco. I think there's some sort of tax break in Philadelphia. So it's more than just a certification. It really is a community of people of organizations that are working together. And to the extent that we can, we drive business to all of our B corporations. So we have an agreement with Vine.com, which is one of Amazon's sites that has a filter for B corporations. I've seen it on soap.com, and then we work with a lot of publications to bring visibility to our community. I think in terms of the why, I'll let folks here speak to that probably a little more, but there are a lot of reasons organizations become certified. The thing I think I've heard the most, which is probably the hardest to quantify, is being part of a larger movement. So I think for a lot of organizations who've especially been leaders for a long time, being part of a community that validates each other and that really is differentiated from, with a clear set of standards is really meaningful. But we've seen incredible work with employee engagement, which I hope folks here talk about because there's been some great work here on the panel. We've seen companies really use this as their sustainability planning tool. My counterpart in Vermont was at Burt's Bees for years. She was the director of sustainability there. And she believes that if she'd had this tool then, it could have saved her tens of thousands of dollars on a sustainability report because she could have really benchmarked against that year to year. And then we have various service offerings, discounts, Salesforce offers the discounts to B Corps. A handful of business schools in the area offer loan forgiveness to students that go work for B corporations. And I know what I was just saying earlier, I don't know the details. I know some version of that exists at Columbia, so I encourage you to go find out. But they're all a little bit different, so I haven't put it all to memory. And then another piece we work on, which has potentially some understandable branding confusion, is a legislative effort to create what's called a benefit corporation. So if the B Corp certification is potentially a standards, a community, a benchmarking, marketing tool, this is a different kind of corporation. It's a new corporate form. And it now exists in 12 states, and it's a for-profit corporation that's taxed like an S Corp or a C Corp, but is committed to having either a general or specific public benefit and held to higher levels of transparency. So it's a bit like our the sort of basic legal requirement that we ask for certification, but more embedded and provides deeper mission lock for a company, especially at time of sale. So fairly new. We think we have about 200 registered benefit corporations, although they're counted state by state, so it's sort of hard to keep track day to day. We're working on 17 more states this year with hopefully 10 passing legislation. The big one being Delaware, which I think, as most folks in here know, is the home of the American corporation. So that'll be a pretty significant shift if that happens in the next few months. I mean, so broadly, I would say our theory of change is that business is one of the most powerful forces in society right now, and we at B Lab consider ourselves in service of the investors, the consumers, the entrepreneurs that are really seeking to redefine success in business. And so we have the great pleasure of working with folks like people here on the panel, and I think they can speak a little bit to both the process and implementation and how it works or doesn't work for them. And I'm happy to answer any questions later.
Thank you, Sophie. What I was hoping that we could now do, that was terrific. And if everyone could just hold questions, I think, because I'm sure you'll get many. If Jesse, I think probably in this order makes sense, but if Jesse and then Lily and Katie could each talk a little bit about their respective firms, the genesis of the companies, why they exist, and why B Corp, why certification, and talk in a little bit more detail about some of the opportunities and the challenges. But if you could each give a few-minute overview of your work.
Sure. Hi, I'm Jessie. I manage our social mission at Warby Parker. Warby Parker is an e-commerce startup. We sell prescription eyeglasses and sunglasses for $95. I see some in the audience, which is exciting. And so, the reasoning behind becoming B Corp certified, I think it's really interesting to first kind of understand why Warby Parker came to be. So our four founders met in business school, and they really wanted to create a company that they wanted to go to work to every day, and wake up super excited for the challenges that lie ahead. And so, and one goal with Warby Parker was to radically transform the optical industry, and then the second goal was to create a profitable company that's scalable and is doing some good without charging a premium. So, this idea was super exciting for our founders, and really we're passionate about the idea of businesses solving problems and not creating problems. So when our founders met the folks at B Lab, I think they kind of felt that they were kindred spirits, just because we had this shared mission. And so the reasons for getting certified was, one, to support B Lab, support this amazing movement, and then also as a young company, getting this third-party certification was, an amazing seal of approval, as Sophie mentioned. But then also, we are really, honored to be part of this community of mission-driven companies.
Cool. Hi everyone, I'm Lily Scott. I work at Veris Wealth Partners. And what is Veris? Veris is a full-service investment consultant for very wealthy people who want us to manage their entire investment portfolio. And not only do they want to achieve their financial objectives, but they also want us to align their investment portfolio with their mission and values. So they want us to create value by aligning their portfolio with their values. And that's a really personal process that involves a lot of question asking, us literally asking our clients, what matters to you? What do you care? What do you think about? What difference do you want to make in the world? Really big sort of existential questions that aren't easy to answer in one sitting. So a lot of our job is really listening and engaging our clients in questions, which is why the B Corp assessment was super natural for Veris, because we spend a lot of our job asking other people questions. So we were pretty good at sort of allowing somebody else to ask us questions and be sort of the ones who were on the other side of the table. So we actually became certified as a B Corporation in 2011, which was 5 years after Veris was founded. And Veris was founded by 5 partners. 3 live in the city. 1 lives in San Francisco and 1 lives in Massachusetts in the country. And 2 of them are farmers. And 3 of them are activists. 1 affordable housing activist in Boston, and 2 were Latin American activists. They started this group called CISPIS, Citizens in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. So really these 5 partners who realized you could take capital markets and harness them to achieve some sort of positive end in the world came together and started Veris. So we already had this sort of social benefit, if you will, from the get-go. And then Veris sort of attracted people within the financial services industry. I was working formerly at a large investment consultancy that doesn't care to think about these issues. And I personally was really attracted to Veris for the reason of the fact that they cared about this. So it was a really natural extension for Veris to go through the B Corp certification. We're just early cheerleaders of this type of a movement. We really want to support those who are doing good work. I think it's interesting to note, I don't know if everybody knows this, but B Lab is 80% funded by Philanthropy. I mean, it's a nonprofit. It's that's how it functions. And so it definitely, it's hoping to build a revenue model and hoping to sort of scale in the ways that businesses do. But it also has this kind of definite benefit written into its origination. So I went through the certification process just recently because we were actually recertified. So B Corp goes through different iterations. They had the version 1, version 2. We did the version 2 and 3. And they're very different versions. They start to ask very different questions. We scored 106 in line with B Lab on the first one, and we're now at 127. So we're in the top 10% of all B Corps in the world. And it's, just kind of thinking about from a personal perspective, being a part of this movement. I was traveling in Kenya with my family on safari, and I went and visited the first Kenyan B Corp, which was a dairy farm outside of Nairobi. So it was really nice to kind of know who I could call up when I was in Kenya, a country where I don't really know anybody. But I think that what the certification has done for Veris in particular is give us a roadmap. It gives us the questions so we know where to engage. To be very tangible, things like, I'm sure we'll talk about this more later, but things like we didn't have a volunteer time off policy, and that was a question that B Corp asked, and we thought, well, that's a great idea. We'd love to encourage people to go and volunteer. And so we now have a policy. We've always tracked our emissions, but we've never actually thought about setting targets to reduce our emissions. And so, B Corp again sort of gave us that point of entry with the question. So Veris is, committed to being a B Corp. It's definitely a consumer-facing certification for us. We use it as a tool. We put it on our signature when we're sending out emails. We put it on our PowerPoints. And for customers who know what it is and care what it is, it differentiates Veris. We're also GEAR certified, so Global Impact Investment Rating Standards. And if you look at the triad, which Sophie had up earlier, which is sort of like policy and then supporting entrepreneurs and then driving capital to entrepreneurs, GEARS is for the impact investors. And so typically funds, investment funds, or companies can get GEARS rated with the hopes that they'll get more capital. So Veris is kind of between being an entrepreneur, of course we're running our own company, and then we're also mobilizing impact investors and saying, here's some really good funds you should look at. And Veris has a preference for GEARS rated funds. Stop there.
So Etsy is an online marketplace. It's a marketplace of makers. And so the rules are you have to either curate or make what you create. And in that we have basically a business that's comprised of 100,000 small businesses. And we really see that as our power, especially as it relates to B Corp, is that we have this outreach to 100,000 companies that kind of work with us. So our mission, I think, is what ended up driving us to B Corp, or I guess to B Labs, to become certified. And it's to reimagine commerce to build a more lasting and fulfilling world. And we, I think, have similar stakeholders to most companies. We look at the environment, we look at our employees' happiness, our community impact, and our investments and fiscal responsibilities. We actually, I think we're a bit cocky when we stepped into the process and thought, we don't manufacture anything, and we're really socially good, and we were founded on this really good premise that is all about loving and caring and sharing. So we thought, you know what, easy. We passed by 0.2. Yeah, so 80.2. We haven't taken the reassessment. We're expecting to clear 100. But I think high point was for us transparency. We share everything with our employees. We also share everything with our marketplace. So the sellers as well as the buyers, we have a completely transparent system of business, and our CEO, Chad Dickerson, works really hard to keep it that way. Where we lost was diversity. So it's actually surprising because for those of you who've been on Etsy, think all girls. But it's actually because we're basically a tech company, we're largely male. And we've done a lot of work in the last year and a half. There's actually been a lot of publicity about Kellen, our CTO, has worked a lot to bring in more female engineers and coders. And that included creating a grant for Hacker School specifically for females. They used to have a 2% female enrollment, and with our grant, they cleared 60% female enrollment. And we hired a lot of those ladies. And so our diversity has changed tremendously. And I would credit the B Corp assessment with that, because we never really thought about it. Another piece where we really lost was our ecological footprint, and didn't actually have to do with the footprint itself. It had to do with us not keeping track of anything. And so we've taken it really seriously and gone beyond what's needed for the B Corp scoring into the tiers of the impact of our marketplace. So when a seller ships something to a buyer, we're now tracking that carbon use, because effectively that's what contributes to our net worth. We're also looking at CDNs. So most companies will measure their data centers, certainly electricity that's consumed on site. A lot of our electricity is effectively consumed globally through content delivery networks that act as these hubs for internet traffic. As far as we know, and using the consultant group that we have, Closed Loop, this has never been tracked before, so it's kind of an interesting and difficult process, but we really believe that effectively that is our footprint. We're using that electricity, and we need to kind of mark it somehow. The CDNs are all over the world, so trying to get a random internet hub in Bangladesh to give you their energy use and try to decipher your percentage of that, it's been a bit of a challenge, but I think eventually we're going to have a complete tracking. So we've taken this method of really data-driven approach to every sector. We now measure employee happiness in a very data-driven way through surveying, and we have developed with the University of Pennsylvania a happiness index that looks at the well-being of our employees, but also their investment in the company and how they view the company's values and how they feel that Etsy is projecting those values into the world. So given a baseline for that, as well as our community engagement, the focus now is how to really make those more cohesive programs, because of the nature of the way Etsy started and the kind of company we are, it can be a little bit loose. And we really want to work systemically to embed this sort of work into everything we do and every decision that we make.
Thank you. Before we open it up, I just wanted to, and some of you touched on this in various ways, but I'd like to focus even more specifically, if I can, on two questions for everyone. I think one is, or Sophie, I'm going to ask these of the other panelists, and then I have other questions for you. Actually, no, but you, well, and I'm going to ask only because it's a question related to profitability, so it's actually a question for profit firms, although
Yeah,
I've got some,
we're far from
but
that.
no, but I have some other questions for you. But it sounds like both sort of internally and externally, the certification process has been very valuable in different respects for all of you. I'd love you to just think for a moment two questions, one for each of you. One, is there an example that you can think of, or any number of dimensions you can think of, where being a certified B Corporation or going through the certification process has made your firm more profitable or more successful than you might have been otherwise? And some of you have touched on this, but actually allowed you to grow the business in a way that sort of viewed a control experiment, and you hadn't taken into account this broader set of stakeholders. That might not be the case. On the investment side, it's a little clear, but on both the enterprise and the investment side. And then two, sort of the converse, are there instances where trying to manage these different set of stakeholders that you are now sort of all accountable for have created any kind of management or leadership challenges? Have there been any trades that you've experienced where some of these perhaps have come into conflict? Anyway, it's a lot, but actually, Katie, we can start. We don't have to go. There's no particular order.
I think we haven't probably realized profit in the same way that other B Corp companies could, simply because it's not really the nature of what we do. So people wouldn't be driven to choose us versus a different e-commerce site because of our certification. Because our operation is pretty separate from what's actually purchased on our site, because what's purchased is made by the interim businesses. That said, I think there's a lot in the second piece of your question. Because we're venture capitalist backed, we're not a public company yet, and we're kind of, as the typical story goes, holding that off. It's been an interesting process to work with our funders and sell this idea to them. And some of our funders are very progressive. Some of them have stakes in News Corp, Walmart, and things like that. So more profit-driven, historically, more profit-driven companies. It actually, I think, has been a bit of an experiment and looked at in somewhat of a petri dish way from our board. So they're interested in it, especially because we're not actually doing it at a loss. So while we're not making profit on it, I think everyone can see where this is all going to fall in 10 years' time, and that it will be important eventually. So I think because our CEO is so passionate about these sorts of things, and really everyone in the company is, especially as we grow, we really try to bring in employees that are going to be behind these sorts of things. The board has allowed it to kind of happen, and now they're really into it. So now we actually have, as a piece of the board meeting, an update on what we call values and impact, but essentially it's coming from the B-Labs assessment.
I think 2 points in terms of increased profitability. It's opened us up to new clients. So we have an office in San Francisco, as I mentioned, and there's a very strong focus there on social entrepreneurs and social enterprise. And there's also a next generation of people who made a lot of money in Silicon Valley and want to invest it. And so we've definitely attracted people in that group. to a greater extent than we probably would have, although, that's not really measurable, perhaps. And then secondly, a lot of our competitive advantage comes from knowing the best and the brightest investment funds out there. And we can actually utilize the B Corp community as a place to access relationships with potential investment funds, and we can do things like negotiate minimums that are lower for our clients. And we can do, just essentially get more information from these folks because they trust us to a certain extent because we're a part of a community, which again, not really quantifiable. On the sort of converse side, I think it's mostly been internal facing. I can't really look at any, profitability issues from sort of the external perspective given our B Corp certification. But internally, it's certainly a time suck. I mean, it takes a lot of resources. It's not, I wouldn't say it's cumbersome, but it definitely is reflective. It's a reflective process, and that takes time to do it well. And so B Lab makes it as easy as possible to go through the assessment, but it still takes time. And so additionally, it's like the assessment takes time, but then actually implementing your priorities once you see where you can improve your score is really what takes time.
So for Warby, it's a little different. As we look at our company, we're first and foremost a fashion company. Second, we offer this amazing experience for our customers, and we offer a super affordable price. And then the fourth thing is we have this social mission. So sometimes customers don't really know about our social mission, and we're okay with that. We're first and foremost fashion. Does a customer, do they feel good about the product that they're wearing on their face? Is it easy to purchase online? Was it an amazing experience? And then our social mission is kind of, the icing on the cake, but does give us the, competitive edge comparing to other eyeglass companies. So in that aspect, not like super profitable. Maybe in 5-10 years that would help us a bit. But I also think that in winning the talent war, having a social mission is huge, and we want the best and the brightest, and so we found that myself included, I wanted to work at Warby because Warby's morals matched mine, and so even more so in this day and age, I think companies with a mission that's so fundamental to our DNA, helps attract those folks, and that's who we want on board. Also, once if customers don't initially know about us because of our social mission, once they do, they're hooked. 50% of our customers find out about us through word of mouth, and so having that social mission component in that conversation, is definitely helpful. With management and leadership, I think that it's been really interesting for me. As I mentioned before, having this mission, doing the right thing, thinking about our stakeholders has been at Warby from the start. So instead of me going to our CFO and being like, oh, but this feels so good, like this is the right thing to do, like we should give back, it's more like, well, B Corp, it's given us this benchmark, and like we can raise our score. So I think that's really helped internally, and having some numbers that we can work with in this social innovation space has been incredibly helpful.
I'm going to ask two more questions, and then I think we open up. Sophie, I'd like to know on this question of Jesse, you mentioned having the numbers is very helpful for you sort of internally, and my question about the numbers, Sophie, are you able to gauge whether the existence of B Lab, either the certification or the legal incorporation piece, has grown the overall investment pie and or the number of startup firms? So, you mentioned this issue that sort of some critics say, oh, you don't really need to exist because sort of firms are doing this anyway. And I would hazard, my hypothesis is there are actually more startups who are going into business for social purpose reasons because you have provided the infrastructure, and that there is more investment capital. But I'm wondering if you're able, is there data to support that, or are you looking to track that in any way?
So I would hazard the same guess. We aren't able to correlate through our existence to the effect of this movement, nor are we able to correlate our certification to direct rise in profit. And I think it's a good question, and I think everyone here answered it with an appropriately complex response. The value isn't necessarily right at the bottom line. So no, I think we can at least anecdotally say that more companies are meeting clear and measurable standards, and moving beyond good intent to actually meeting a bar. I think that's where we provide value in the marketplace. And in all seriousness, it's why I work here. I'm sort of highly committed to measurement, and I think that there's incredible intent and wonderful. Well, there's incredible intent, and there's also just kind of good marketing. Putting a windmill on an advertisement and calling yourself green. And so I think that's where we're going to see our value, increasingly present. The other piece I think I mentioned briefly, we've been talking a lot about this Measure What Matters campaign, is we're realizing we're beginning to sit on a really interesting set of data. And the certified companies, we are able to verify those scores. But even with unverified scores, we've had 7,000 companies take some parts of the assessment. If we can raise that number, then I think we're sitting on a really interesting data set where we could compare certified to uncertified. It's not a cross set of it's still a sort of sustainable interest subset, that's 7,000. But I think there'll be some really interesting work to be done with that data, and we're getting approached more and more by academic institutions and others who want to begin to look at trends within that. So I wish we could measure it, but not in filtering experience, I don't know.
One more question, and this is to Sophie, although it may also be relevant for the entrepreneurs. This question of fiduciary responsibility and the legal protection that you provide either through the certification process or the incorporation process, have you seen instances where companies have actually invoked that or shield or leveraged that in a way in discussion? Anyway, have you seen that actually come into practice?
Yeah, so there's currently no sort of official case law. It hasn't been brought to the courts. We certainly expect with Benefit Corporation that it will. I think that should be a really interesting test. I think where it's been at least considered and discussed most is at point of sale. And I don't know that anyone's, it entitles a seller to take, in theory, a lower bid to a company that's going to maintain mission. But I think so far, most sales have been in that direction anyway. So we have had folks lose their certification, but I think, but we haven't had it challenged in court yet, or even had and even if it were, the right of action is just to change the decision or change the behavior. There's not a sort of, no money to be made off exercising that. So time will tell. I mean, it's a good question about how airtight that is.
And B Lab was founded by lawyers.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And
business folks.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there are lots of questions for all of you, so maybe we could open it up to those questions.
I was wondering for Sophie, what's the biggest B Corporation? And also, like Walmart was to take the test. What do you expect they get?
Good question. Our biggest ones, somewhere around revenue, would be Cabot Creameries is quite big up here in the Northeast. Ben & Jerry's as a major subsidiary, Patagonia. The Afghan telco is actually quite large. We don't anticipate that many, if any, public companies will become certified because of the legal component, just the negotiation with shareholders and kind of the shareholder interest at that point. We do think, we do expect a handful of B corporations to go public in the next couple of years. And that'll be another interesting test of that legal requirement. If I have no idea how Walmart would score. Yeah, I have no idea how to answer that. But yeah. Separately from Walmart, because I don't want to, there's no sort of opinion, what opinion made about Walmart, but we do actually, one thing that hasn't come up is we do ask for a certain disclosure. There's a bit of disclosure questionnaire at the end that isn't weighted in the assessment, but we do reserve the right to withhold certification from a company that maybe did score high, but whose impact, for whatever reason, we had concerns about. That was separate though.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, it looked like the governance component was relatively small compared to the other three. And I also was looking, so I mean, yeah, I guess you could have a lot of public corporations that could score up to 80 points, especially with the CDP out there, the GRI kind of pushing this information out there. So the disclosure, the question at the end where you can kind of exercise discretion, I mean, have you guys had to do that yet? Or do you anticipate?
So the only time, and this, I don't know if this is public or not, the only time there was, that B Lab took pause was a medical marijuana facility. And I think, whether it was relationship to tobacco or legality in some states and not others, but we did certify them. But yeah, and actually we would love for public companies to take the assessment and use the assessment and use it for all the exact same reasons everyone here is using it. We just suspect the legal component would be hard, but we'd be glad to work with them on scoring whatever they score, and they can keep their score confidential forever.
So there is a prerequisite? Like, when you talk about the legal component, I mean, it's a governance structure, so couldn't you score other points, or are there prerequisites, and then is there a scoring mechanism as well?
So we don't provide score for the legal amendment, but we do ask for an amendment in the Articles of Incorporation. So you actually have to, essentially refile or amend your articles at the state level, if you can. It's not possible in every state. For certification, but not, obviously, again, not to.
What happens after you're certified? How do you kind of keep your certification, or?
Well, do you want to speak to that? You just
Sure.
I'm happy to speak to it too.
Well,
but just-
why don't you give the
Sure, I'll give
technicalities?
it. Yeah. So we ask companies to recertify every 2 years, and the assessment based on company feedback, public feedback, feedback from our advisory board evolves every 2 years. So we ask them to fully retake the assessment. We do on-site reviews of 10% of our B corporations, which is an increasing number every year, and then we'll do on-site reviews of every wholly owned subsidiary every term. We hold wholly owned subsidiaries to a higher level of transparency and accountability because they essentially have one shareholder to hold them accountable. So that's sort of the technical side, and the recertification, Lily, I think, just finished this year's.
Yeah. And they keep all of our paperwork on file, so that's kind of nice. So they say, actually, we have this back, because you have to send, documents that sort of back up what you're writing into your assessment. And they had, probably 50% of the documents we needed on file, so then we just filed the additional documents. And anything that we had added, like a volunteer time off policy and things of that nature.
I'm wondering if you could all just briefly give us a bit more detail about what you do at your companies, like what your positions are, and kind of what your backgrounds are, how you came into the work.
Okay. So we actually founded the Values and Impact team on the back of this work. The broad mission is to keep Etsy. So if that's okay enough for you. Basically, when the company was small, it was really easy for all of these decisions to just be. That you always did the right thing by all of the stakeholders that we've mentioned because there's 5 of you in a loft in Dumbo and it's easy. As we've grown, it became pretty apparent that not only did we need to have a more systematic approach for the growing number of employees, now closer to the order of 400 people, but we also need it for if and when we go public, and the coming pressures of being venture-backed and what you have to produce. And we didn't want to lose that control and that ability to actually make sure that we're doing right by all of the various stakeholders, regardless of who actually has share control of the company. And I think we realized that there's a lot more that could be done. So our real power, I think, is the 100,000 businesses that we work with, all of the sellers that we have, and the massive audience that we have to propagate these ideas. So we do things like we have an upcoming conference of ideas that's not about our brand. It's just about getting people in a room to talk about the future of commerce, how we adapt our work styles, how we're going to adapt the economy and consumption. Y'all should come to that. called Hello Etsy. You can find it online. So it's a lot about just making the world a better place in a way. In so having a team, and it allows us to leverage those things. We also, as I kind of mentioned, have this very data-driven approach, and the concept is to open source share everything. So if any other company wants our employee happiness assessment survey, then they can take it. Yeah, exactly. And we're very transparent about the pitfalls and the victories and every kind of stumbling block that we've had or difficulty that we've had. We have a regular blog about it. We just posted about how hard it's been to get heat data from our landlord, and the difficulties that you run into when you really try to get your ecological footprint on a genuine level. So the concept is to just broaden that conversation and to promote not just B Corp, but those same sort of values-based ideas as far and wide as we can. My personal history, it's kind of interesting. I'm a marine biologist by trade, so ended up working in news for quite a while. I think I found Etsy. I founded a nonprofit about 7 years ago that is based in Tanzania, and sort of through the conjunction of business experience and nonprofit experience made sense. I worked for Reuters previously and did a lot of the same kind of work at Reuters on an informal level because Reuters doesn't actually have a position for it.
My job at Veris is to conduct due diligence and research potential investments for our clients. So I don't do any really client-facing work unless I'm pulled in for a meeting to talk about a specific investment. So I started at Veris about 5 years ago. The company was founded in 2007. I joined in 2008. Took 2 years off, went to business school. Continued to work about 15 hours a week though. And I really was, from the beginning, interested in asking people questions. I was an anthropologist, and living in Madagascar, studying women who'd started their own businesses in 2005, and realized that women who took it upon themselves to start their own businesses were able to support their families, their communities, their country, etc. And this was before I really knew about the concept of microfinance. And so I came back to the States and said, I really need to get, finance training and figure out how to, unleash this potential. And so that's how I got started. And so I love my job. I wake up every day and just think I get to go and ask people questions about why they're doing what they're doing and how they're doing what they're doing, and know that the answer they give me is not necessarily the answer. And so it has a real ethnographic perspective to it. And I'm, making sure that these investments are not going to blow up for our clients. So.
So I'm a little all over the place at Warby, but I kind of like it that way. But first of all, I manage all of our nonprofit partners. So we have our primary partners through our Buy a Pair, Give a Pair program. For every pair of glasses we sell, we distribute a pair of glasses to somebody in need. So we work with 2 primary nonprofit partners there. Each year we do nonprofit product collaborations. So we'll work with an amazing nonprofit and collaborate on design, on a pair of sunglasses or a collection of optical glasses. So last year we worked with Pencils of Promise, and this year we're working with DonorsChoose.org and Architecture for Humanity. I don't think that's public knowledge yet. Sorry. And so what's super exciting about that is, we collaborate on a pair of frames, and we're able to give, a cash donation for every unit sold to this nonprofit, but we also try to go really deep. So how can this partnership be mutually beneficial? So with Pencils of Promise, for example, we've been able to offer support with our UX team and design team and online experience team as they're going through a website revamp. They've helped us with recruiting and sending their former interns over to our customer experience team. So there, it's for me, I've been able to forge these amazing friendships and partners on behalf of Warby, and we've really been able to integrate our company culture with variety of nonprofits. Also, I help facilitate different opportunities for Warby Parker employees to give back. this buy a pair, give a pair program is a huge reason why people are at Warby Parker, but it's not very tangible. So thinking about ways how to translate this social ethos into opportunities here in New York. I also, it's all of our responsibility at Warby Parker to infuse our social mission into everything we do and every decision we make and every project we take on. But I help facilitate those conversations and provide support in making those things happen. So for example, we're opening our first brick and mortar retail store in Soho, and so I just met with our director of retail, and we went through all the different ways that we could infuse our mission. So for our employees and for our retail staff and for our customers. So you can see, you can feel our social mission in every time we interact with Warby. My personal path, I guess, I studied political science undergrad, moved to England for a year, really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I was fortunate, one of my friends put me in touch with Neil, one of our founders. Never heard of Warby Parker, didn't really know what a startup was. But chatted with him for about 10 minutes and I was like, sign me up, this is amazing. So I started in March 2011 when there was about 20 of us. Started in a customer experience role, just trying to learn everything I could, and then within the first year found myself really wanting to take ownership over our social mission, and then moved over to that team, team of one, full time. And yeah, now there's like 160 employees and counting, so I've seen incredible growth.
Great. So my role at B Lab is to build the community of certified B Corps on the East Coast, or broadly New York, Connecticut, New Jersey. We have a really strong presence in the Bay Area and a growing presence here, but I think some real opportunity to get folks involved from the financial services community, from the kind of industries based, especially here in the city. It's nice to hear other people have circuitous paths. Mine started as an art history major turned high school teacher, so I taught in Oakland, California for 7 years. Transitioned into the health space and worked in public health at the Clinton Foundation for a couple of years. Ended up working with at the Clinton Global Initiative with large companies who had an interest in that health space, and that's where I got much more interested in the sort of business for good space. And in that role had an incredible vantage point in a lot of different organizations and companies. I was just really excited about both B Lab's mission, its rigor, and also its culture. So just started there maybe 5 or 6 months ago. So relatively new.
Questions best for you, Sophie. Just around the B Corp, I've heard a lot of sort of not mixed messages, but just different people thinking different things about the certification versus the legal structure. Would you mind just speaking a little bit about the uniqueness of the legal structure? I heard at one point that it was sort of for the protection of some of the shareholders, in the sense that the sort of social mission was built in to the structure itself. But at the same time, it sounds like it's also probably more suited for kind of private startups rather than something going public. Is that sort of true? Would you mind?
Yeah, I can try. I'll give it my best shot. There's a very long white paper at benefitcorp.net,
okay.
which I would encourage anyone who's interested to read. So the first thing I'll say is that it was a specific strategic choice of ours, good one or bad one is still TBD, to name those so closely. We could have called it a purpose corporation, a sustainable corporation, but the idea was that the B brand was taking off and the benefit concept was taking off, and so the halo effect of each of those, ultimately at the end of the day, everyone's working towards the same goal of sort of stakeholder consideration. But I do spend a lot of time trying to explain the difference. So those are the days I'm less sure about that choice. Yeah, the intent is to lock mission, and I think sort of 2 examples of how that could work are to protect directors of a company in making mission-based choices. So a potential kind of urban myth, cautionary tale, which I think actually the details aren't quite true, but as an example, a story people often tell is when Ben & Jerry's went to sell, Unilever came in with a much higher bid than anyone else, and they had, essentially a legal obligation to take that bid, to move in that direction, to maximize profit for shareholders. My understanding is they worked out a wonderful arrangement, and they've really maintained value and now have been certified. But in theory, had they been a benefit corporation, maybe they could have taken a lower amount. The flip side is that I heard a really interesting talk by the founder of a for-profit microfinance institution, who left leadership of the organization and remained a shareholder, and began to be very, very concerned with the practices, essentially predatory lending practices that were happening in his company. In theory, had he been a benefit corporation, he would have had some action to challenge the directors of the company, to say, as a shareholder in this company, you're a benefit corporation, you've made a commitment to mission. Again, none of it's gone to the courts, but those would be sort of how it plays out.
So I don't mean to trip you up. So you may not know the specifics on this, but there are other social purpose mission legislation brewing at the state level, and I'm just wondering, are they that substantially materially different than B Corps? Are you working with are they at cross purposes? Is it essentially just a broader movement building? How do those, and that's right, Flexible Purpose Corporation, and what are there differences? Is it sort of the same?
So I did ask my colleague on the policy team to come for this reason. Because I think her husband's getting his PhD there or something. Some silly reason like that, she couldn't come. So I'll speak in generalities. But yes, there's for example the Flexible Purpose Corporation, and I do think that the other legislations being put forward are much more permissive. So potentially don't necessarily hold the same standard of accountability and transparency. And our big concern when we do work with folks, which is generally what's happening is a conversation with the Bar Association in specific states. And our biggest concern is that they don't name a permissive legislation, benefit corporation legislation, and that at least we maintain the brand with a high degree of consistency and rigor. So in California, for example, they passed both. There's Flexible Purpose Corporation and there's benefit corporation legislation. Currently we're seeing, I think, four times more uptake of benefit corporation, but we're perfectly happy to let the markets decide what makes the most sense, and perfectly happy to put more tools out there. I think our biggest concern would just be brand confusion if it was named something.
Great.
So conceptually, I think we run the same risk as the movement of greenwashing that happened. Like right now, B Corp is this amazing certification because you can't bullshit it. It's really clear. But with all of these kind of wannabes cropping up, it's kind of a scary potential that wouldn't really be a meaningful thing anymore.
In terms of evolution of the metric or the scorecard, has there been anything surprising that is reflective of maybe a change in the business community or environment that you would never have didn't see popping up in version 1 and now you're on version 3 and it's oh, that's interesting, we wouldn't have, or maybe not?
No, it's a good question. I think the biggest change, and for folks who've taken the certification twice, if you want to add to that too, the assessment twice, our biggest change was really clarifying social business models. I think that earlier versions of the assessment were really looking at core operations. In fact, I think I didn't mention that too well, but really, in name, the assessment is in 5 sections, but you could really actually break it down in theory into 2 scores, one being core operations and core business, and one being business models. And we, with this emergence of business models that are entirely for an environmental or social good, we decided to kind of create some more opportunities for credit in that space, while also giving credit for core operations for a very traditional manufacturing company, things like that. So I think that was the biggest addition in the last couple of years.
Have there been other surprises? So Katie, you mentioned that you assumed before you even took the certification that you guys would be fabulous and your scores would right, and that was surprising to you to learn that actually at the level, at the granular level, there were areas for improvement. I'm wondering if there were other surprises, good or bad, for any of you that in the certification process, sort of entering this community that you uncovered by becoming a B Corp.
Our company is a boring finance company, and we kind of didn't expect to do that well. And we actually got really even scores across all 4 areas. So the governance, the environment, the community, and the 4th one. And founders, me, and it was all around 65%, out of the total score. And we didn't expect to have that sort of even, score across the 4 areas. Not that exciting, but that was our big insight.
So I wasn't directly working on the certification when it first happened in early 2011, but I'm just starting to look through the recertification process, so it's been incredibly interesting and insightful for me to kind of dig deep. I think the biggest thing that I've kind of taken away from it is, reading these questions and being like, oh, we do that, but do people know about that? And is it written down anywhere? So I think it's super exciting that the content and we do all these amazing things, but kind of like fleshing it out and making a policy and articulating it to my colleagues.
Another thing to add quickly, is that you don't get penalized. This isn't like a penalty. It's not a compliance review. It's not prescriptive. It's literally like, you get to try it on as a company and decide what your priorities are and decide which parts to ignore and which parts are important to you. So like we fly all the time. Partners, employees are flying all around the company. We're not getting penalized for that carbon footprint, but we will get a positive score if we're offsetting our carbon footprint. So that was kind of a nice surprise.
Yeah. How much do you reach out to other companies in the B space? I mean, I know you have a conference coming up, and do you actually go in and participate in the community in any sense, interact with either in your industries or with just in the spaces of other, just chatting with other B companies in that space?
I try to reach out to different B Corps. B Lab's amazing in making introductions. And so I've set a goal to reach out to one a week. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened that much. How to go with you won't write me back. I have been able to chat with a few. Warby actually hosted a New York party for New York and New Jersey and Pennsylvania B Corp companies, and so that was last summer, and that was amazing. We didn't really have a set agenda, but it was a chance for all of our employees and these other companies' employees to interact and chat. And I went to one at Etsy. You guys had one a month or so ago. Yeah.
There's 2 ways that Veris is interacting. One is really trying to mobilize other investment consultants and wealth managers and people in our space to become B Corp certified. And for those, there's only a handful of us. There's maybe 700 total certified B Corps, and there's maybe 35 in the financial services industry. And 50% of those or more are microfinance organizations, so it's really a small group of people. And so we're trying to sort of mobilize and say, hey, let's start a movement within the B Corp movement that's all about moving your money. And we can say we're all B Corps, we're investing people's money and encourage investors to move their money to investment consultants and wealth managers who have this sort of explicit benefit to the environment and society. So that's one way. And then, actually Anders Ferguson, one of the partners at Veris, who was going to be the one male panelist tonight but asked me to come, he actually was the reason that Cabot Creamery is now B Corp. So we do a lot of, he's very good friends with the chief marketing officer there, and it really encouraged them to look at the certification. They took a really good look and are now creating an ad in the New York Times, which will be this weekend actually. If you're in the newspaper of the New York Times on Sunday, there'll be an ad, a B Corp ad that Cabot Creamery is running, and Veris is in there, and Etsy's in there, I think a bunch of others. And so we definitely go out and encourage people, especially larger organizations, because once you kind of hit that tipping point, that's definitely been the trend for B Lab. They started out with just young, punky organizations that were like, I want to do this. And now it's like these large organizations that are like really vetting the process and figuring it out, and it's actually kind of turning off some of the young, punky organizations who are like, hey, it was about us to begin with. But you have to kind of, to create a movement, hit that tipping point. And so I think B Lab's trying to navigate that complex, situation.
I think our involvement mostly has to do with our makers, our sellers. So we're encouraging them to get certified, which is a really interesting process and is a program that we'll be rolling out later in a more formal way. but basically we see this as a tremendous amount of power that we have to encourage sellers to do the right thing. And a lot of them, I think for really small businesses of one, for example, it's pretty easy to just write a policy. If you need to have a policy, just make it. But in the same way that we've been talking about, it becomes a guiding set of principles. So it's things that they probably had never thought about. It's just as easy to do it in a beneficial way as a harmful way, so switch over. So we think that there will be a massive sea change coming from the handmade community, at least.
I think we have time for one more.
This maybe no, because you're all kind of social purpose companies, but was there any internal pushback when someone said we're going to become a B Corp? Lily, you said it was a time suck. Was it a pitch at all? Did anyone have to persuade anyone, or did the whole company just jump on board right away?
So Veris is an employee-owned company owned by 5 partners who, make all the decisions essentially from an organizational perspective. And so I think there was a lot of concern that around the governance piece that there would be a level of transparency that might be an issue. So things like reporting our revenue to, the outside world, which, as it turns out, you can just kind of avoid questions you don't want to answer. So that's been what we've done. So it's been a process. It's had to go through compliance. It's had to go by the CIO to make sure that the questions that we're answering are okay. So I think the only pushback was just, a little bit of fear, I have to say, just from the perspective of like, wow, we're really opening up our books. We're really opening up, who we are and the decisions we've made as an organization. But we believe it and we're willing to push through that fear. Yeah.
I get pushback all the time. I can speak to that a little bit, but I'm sure it'd be interesting to hear what people think. I think the legal piece, I think lawyers' jobs is to worry, and so they often just balk for a second, and then, and in many cases, then realize, gosh, we've always been doing this. It's not, it's not a big deal. But for some companies, just hearing that, they're just understandably risk averse. The certification fee is not insignificant for bigger companies. It starts for companies under with revenue under $2 million. It's $500 a year, and then it goes up from there. And for companies with over $100 million in revenue, it's $25,000 a year. So it's not it's certainly well within a marketing budget, well within an HR budget. It's way cheaper than creating a sustainability report. But it still needs to be justified. And I think what's been interesting is that the value is best derived when it's HR and finance and facilities and marketing all of the tables together. And it's actually kind of an organizing tool for them to all work on something together. But each of them with their slice of the pie, it doesn't quite feel worth it. Right? The CFO is like, I have other places to spend this money. The marketing person sees it as a good marketing tool, but not a great one. When you put it all together, it works. And so I think that's been a strategy we're using more and more, is just to get everyone at the table right off the bat and talk about how it applies to everybody.
Yeah, I mean, not to repeat what I said before, but I think that, Warby, we're really fortunate that our mission is who we are, and it's core to how we operate, and it's part of our model. So having those building blocks from the start, it was only natural to be B Corp certified. But to Sophie's point, I think it's really exciting that it's everybody's job, it's every department to join together and improve our score. And so that's been a really rewarding experience for me and for Warby.
I think I have a really boring answer, which is that there's not been any pushback at all for 5 seconds. What's been amazing is that everyone in the company is really, really excited about it. And it's been this huge unifying factor amongst different departments within the company. So our CTO is so excited, and he loves that he gets to wrangle our data center and try to get them to install solar panels on the roof. And so I think the level of enthusiasm from, how are we going to change our recycling to how are we actually going to assess our CDN and our data center, everyone has really jumped on board and helped a lot. So it's been amazing, I think, for employee morale.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Well, I think, thank you to everyone for participating. And am I right that we have, we can continue the conversation sort of in more intimate groups or one-on-one or more specific questions in the reception, but let's, thank you.